Hello, fabulous listeners, and thanks for tuning in to All Bodies Outside. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Peterson. Today's guest is Pei Ting, whose nickname is PT. PT is Malaysian Chinese and works in the outdoor education industry in Australia. During today's episode, we're going to focus on a presentation of PTs that is titled Beyond Representation, People of Color Working in Outdoor Education in Australia. In this presentation, two of PT's written works are discussed. The first one is titled Beyond Tropes, a dialogue on Asian women's experiences in the outdoors. And the other is titled, Is This a Real Job? A narrative research on the lived experiences of people of color working in outdoor education in Australia. Before we get started, I wanted to provide a land acknowledgement statement for the university where I conduct research, which is Kansas State University. As the first United States land grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is historically home to many Native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized Native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska. Many Native nations utilize the Western Plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation for this institution was, and still is, stolen land. We remember these truths because Kansas State University's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists with ongoing settler colonialism and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that Kansas State University's history begins and continues through indigenous context is essential. All right, well, let's get going with this episode. PT, thanks for joining us from Melbourne, Australia.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. I also like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Melbourne, which is traditionally called Nam, and this is the land of the Bunwurrung and Woiwurrung of the Kulin Nation. I want to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and this is always and always will be Aboriginal land. Thanks for having me, Brian. That's a good opportunity.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, again, thanks for tuning in from Melbourne, Australia. And so, today our big conversation is going to be about outdoor education in Australia. And before we kind of get into your presentation and whatnot, I wanted to hear about, how you got into outdoor education and what are you currently up to in the outdoor education industry?
Cool. Well, my origin story, it's all about luck and chance. When I finished A-levels, which is senior high school, I took a gap year, which is very rare in Malaysia to have someone do that. And during that gap year, my goal was to work and save money and go walk the Everest Base Camp walk. I'm not quite sure why I had that desire, but I developed that through my teenage years. And then I was like, all right, this is the gap year, I'm going to do it. And in the process of doing various jobs, I somehow landed on a job in an outdoor company in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur. At that stage, there really isn't a lot of outdoor companies. And I was aware of this company because they were very prominent in the media. They were the first company that opened the first climbing gym in Malaysia. They ran the first whitewater rafting trip. So they were pioneers in a lot of the things that they did. And it was just a small little outfit. And I just applied for a job on a whim and they took me on. And I worked there for 3 years, went on my backpacking trip. And then when I came back, they said to me, do you want to stay? And at that stage, I was trying a few things for studies. I was applying to medicine and pharmacy and it's not that I couldn't get into those courses. It was more like I couldn't get the scholarships to go to those courses. And I was at a stage where, okay, the things I want to do is not happening. And these guys are offering me an opportunity. And I'm really enjoying the work. And then I ended up staying for 2.5 years. So that was a starting point of me delving into the outdoor industry. So it was a really good well-rounded all-round exposure to the industry. Like I wasn't a professional, I wasn't a trained professional, but I could jump into the boats. I was leading groups on high ropes courses, and so it was like a nice way to just dab my hand into different things. I was also doing retail, like selling outdoor gear. And at the end of that 2.5 years, I started thinking, okay, is there a way for me to train as a professional in this industry? Is it even possible? And after some research and some ideas from friends, I found out that there were two possibilities. It was New Zealand to do a diploma or a bachelor's degree in outdoor skills, or in Australia as well. Australia has a system of qualification that they have here. And I guess it just narrowed down. The only option, the only feasible option for me at that stage was what was offered here in Alabama, Australia, because they were running what we call here a Certificate 4 program in outdoor recreation. And to me, I knew about Alabama since I was a little kid. And to me, that brand, that name is very recognizable. And I thought, okay, that will look good on my resume. And also, it was the cheapest program. If I try hard enough, it was an internship, so I pay a fee, and through my 9 months of study, everything's covered, accommodation and food's covered. So I was like, okay, that's like the most affordable option for me. And that's how I ended up in Alabama, Australia, and landed in Canberra in July in the middle of winter, and went out bush straight away for 10 days and didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. And from then on, that's how I started as a qualified professional and gained experience in Australia, and then eventually Hong Kong, and did a couple of summer seasons in America as well.
Nice.
And then throughout the way, I also picked up a bachelor's of psychology, and then eventually I managed to come back to Australia, got sponsored for a residency with a job in outdoor ed. And that was 2016. And right now I'm working, it's a bit of an overlap between outdoor education and social services, because technically we are a mental health service. What we do is we run outdoor trips, so camping, hiking, bushwalks for adults with mental health conditions. Yeah, so people who are under the care of have a mental health plan, or diagnosed with psychiatric or learning disabilities. Yeah, we bring them out on trips. So for most of my career, I've been working with young people, and this is a nice change, working with adults, smaller ratios. Yeah, and nice. less intense and adventurous trips, but still, a different way to experience the outdoors. I've definitely transitioned my thinking about what does it mean to experience the outdoors.
Yeah. And so within all this, what encompasses the outdoor education industry? It sounds like it's very multifaceted. There's a lot to it. So I have two questions. The second one's very simple. Maybe you should just do that one first. But
sure.
What is bushwalking?
Bushwalking, pretty much just backpacking, going for a walk, hiking. Yeah. So the terminology just is hiking. Yeah.
Cool.
And when I say jumper, it just means sweater. So
nice. Yeah. Well, I'm sure. Okay. So what is all encompassed within the outdoor education industry? I mean, it sounds like it's very multifaceted.
Yeah, I think in Australia, when we say outdoor education, it usually means offering outdoor trips and programs within an education setting. So for schools and school groups, it is a big industry here that caters to that. Partly because outdoor education is part of the curriculum in Australia, whereas education is state-based. So every state has different emphasis on outdoor education. So I'm in the state of Victoria, and Victoria has like a little requirement in their PE subject to say they have to experience something outdoors. So we tend to take a lot of groups in year 7 to year 9, which is about middle school in American sense, on camps. And so it depends, like, well, if you're a private school, you can afford like a really, really remote, adventurous journey. Whereas a lot of public schools, where less funding, they just go on a little excursion to national park for a day. So it depends, like what the experience is. So the organizations that I work for, we cater to schools that want to come on camp, and they send their whole year level out, or every year or the year level, they choose 3 or 4 different trips that they get to pick what they want to do. And some schools dictate heavily on what kind of curriculum that is to be delivered on these programs, whereas some schools are just, all right, cool, just go out and have a good time and learn what you can. So it will depend, but back to the curriculum part, and then the senior high school kids here, as part of their graduating certificate, they can pick outdoor education as an elective. So that's another element of having outdoor education as part of the curriculum. So when we say outdoor ed, that's usually what we mean. But also there's also like a lot of small little subclasses of what we mean by that. There's obviously a big outdoor recreation industry, so it's just leading, guiding, adult groups or tourism groups, and then there's the niche work that I do now, which is overlapping with social services. But I guess we all attend the outdoor education conference because we're often sharing knowledge in risk management, because we're all dictated under the same qualification and what we can or cannot deliver. Australia has something called the Australian Adventure Standards. So it states, like, for hiking, this is the recommended guidelines on, like, what's the ratio, what skills do you need to have, and because we're all dictated by that, so we kind of call all this outdoor education. Yeah. And then, within the authority bodies as well, there's camps association. So all the outfits that run what we call hardtop camps, like camp facilities with cabins and accommodation providers, they have their own association the things that they discuss is quite unique for themselves, because they're covering things like accommodation and property management, whereas that's like that, you could call that a subset of outdoor education, I suppose. Yeah. Okay. That was a big rambling.
No, that's
trying
okay.
to give an overview of
well, it's a big question, right?
Yeah.
It was a big question. So the company that you're currently working for, which you're doing some social services, what's the name of that company?
The company that I work for is Outdoors Inc. So out space doors. So the idea is we're getting them out the door from their living situations. So a lot of adults with mental health conditions tend to be isolated, stay at home. And so the idea of the name is that we're getting them out the door to socialize, to be with nature, to be outside.
Nice. Okay, and so I want to start transitioning into the presentation I mentioned in the introduction. And I think from what I gathered as I prepared for our conversation today, I read your 2 articles that you shared with me, one being a book chapter, one being a manuscript, your thesis. Also looked through your presentation. It sounded like you've had a lot of positive experiences. You've also had some major barriers that you've had to go through in the outdoor education industry to kind of progress up your career ladder. And so reading everything that I prepared for this conversation, it seemed like that stuff is what really influenced your research and your presentation. And so I wanted to maybe just start off with hearing about some of those barriers that you've experienced in Australia with an outdoor education, and how that inspired you to take this a step further to really understand it at a depth.
Yeah, I guess the most salient barrier that I encounter through my career was just my status as a non-resident. And Australia is a migrant country, and a lot of people come from overseas, coming here, trying to make a living, trying to stay. And the first 10 years of my career has definitely been influenced or dictated by where I can or cannot get visas. So when I first came to train in my Cert 4, I had to leave the country because that was the end of my visa, and my profession and the wages I was earning did not qualify me for any visas to stay. So I had to leave Australia, and I ended up in Hong Kong because they had a viable visa that I could get. So I was there for cumulatively about 6 months. And I managed to work in America because there is a summer a visa class for summer workers that want to work in camp and camp counselors. So that was a viable way. And these were all really good opportunities for me to gain exposure and gain a lot of work experience. But there's no stability and definitely very little growth in that sense in terms of career advancement because I can't stay, so people don't see me as a potential for leadership, and they expect me to leave eventually. Right. So that's one that's one of the barriers, and then the implicitly as well, all these visas cost money. So traveling around and paying for immigration procedures all cost money. So I often will spend money in trying to go to a country, save money from the work, and then spend money again to go somewhere else. Yeah, wow. And that was one of the reasons why it came to a point where I ended up back in Malaysia and decided that I needed to stay rooted somewhere, and I started to do my bachelor's in psychology just because I felt like it was a little bit of a lost cause, spending money in, money out really quickly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and so visa was it pretty much dictated how my career looked like for the first 10 years.
Wow.
And then in 2016 or early 2017, I managed to get a job with a company that has the ability to offer me a visa, which means I can become a permanent resident in Australia. Nice. And that was like a big turning point because that was what I was working for a long time. And I was back here at the first place in 2016 on a backpacker visa. So I was here presumably to backpack and travel, but my real goal was to actually find a job and get sponsorship. And I tried that in New Zealand, wasn't successful, and I tried it in Australia, and I was really, really lucky to get that opportunity, because pretty much 6 months later, the criteria for that visa changed, and I wouldn't have qualified for it. Yeah, so it's a very it's a very precarious, very precarious kind of situation. So with that stability, that changed a lot on my outlook of the career. So for the first time, I could actually think about, okay, where do I want to go? What leadership positions I want to be in? How can I progress and advance? And for the first time, I could save money and think about, just have a plan for the future. That was a big step. But I guess that period of elation kind of lasted like a year and a half. And during I worked in that organization for 3 years, and that was because I was required to under my visa requirements. Yeah. But in that 3 years, halfway through that 3 years, I was attempting to apply for more senior roles or more varied positions with just different portfolios. But I felt like I wasn't going anywhere. I kept getting knocked back and seeing other people move up to those positions that I feel that I have more experience for. And I guess that also alludes to a challenge that I find throughout my whole career as well, is that because I have less money and less time to do a lot of big personal adventures, my logbook never seems to be as glamorous as, of a fellow white dude who's like had time to go, do a big mountaineering course, a big mountaineering adventure, and they can claim they've logged all these days doing this activity. So like the early part of my career, because like a lot of job requirements, they require you to prove your technical ability, and it was not a competition that I have an advantage for. So I always struggle to be competitive in that sense. Just to illustrate, like an example, I trained to be an outdoor professional in 2010. I could really only afford a full rack of rock climbing gear in 2017.
Wow.
And I only was able to afford a mountain bike and try mountain biking for the first time in 2018. And that was because I got a full-time job and had like a living wage. Yeah. Like I just couldn't have that because I explained earlier, money came in and money was going out for visas and travel and moving abroad and moving here and there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're all compounding factors. Yeah.
A lot of compounding factors and a lot of socioeconomic factors. I feel like there's probably some sociocultural aspects too, where, you're working in a world that is this European American romanticized concept of nature and whatnot. And that's not a worldview at all. There's a lot of different conceptualizations of nature. And I also got to imagine, within the outdoor education industry, there's probably not a lot of females that are up in management roles. And there's probably not a lot of minorities in those roles either. And so that might be something that could be a barrier too.
Yeah, you're right. Like, interestingly, Australia has now reached or surpassed gender parity in terms of the first level of workers in the outdoor world. So we have pretty much 50-50 men, women instructors in the field. But if you move further up, that gender parity loses, like it's gone, and it's unbalanced again. And you're right, yeah. And in terms of minority status, I'm very used to being the token minority in all the groups that I'm in, on all the teams that I operate in. And I would admit that I wasn't very aware of a lot of the casual racism or like the structural systemic discrimination that's inbuilt in the system. I was not aware until 2018, 2019, when I had a really bad HR encounter with human resources. And from then on, I was like, what is going on? And I had to like go through this steep learning curve in learning the language and really understanding what positioning myself in this system that I'm operating and like what is going on. Yeah.
And I bet some of those aggressions that you maybe came across and whatnot would probably be pretty hard to even process and understand for a while. But one of the things that I picked up on that I thought was just a really fantastic statement in one of your manuscripts was that you experienced a lot of microaggressions, and that is an indicator of institutionalized racism, where people are almost doing this without even knowing it themselves, which is an indicator of the institutionalized aspect of it.
Yeah. And before 2019, I could tell you the times where every time I appear for the first day at work, we do a quick training for new staff, and the trainer will go around and say, okay, what's your experience, And I remember one time I said, oh, I've done 10 years of this, and they're like taken aback because that's not what they expect me to say, based on how I look. And I had like the most experience out of the whole group. That happened, quite often. And, very often when I'm out in the field and when we're public facing, so for example, I'm leading a group of people and I have a co-instructor with me, and a member of the public comes over and like wants to chat or asks us a question, they will definitely go straight to my coworker, especially if they're a white white male. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I put myself up and say I'm the leader of this group, their reaction is quite different. You can see that change for sure. I've definitely had casual staff who didn't realize I'm in a coordination role, and we meet during a training session, and I'm standing next to a friend, a white Australian man, and he completely ignored me in conversation, just talk to my friend, not knowing that I'm already in a leadership position in the company, and I'll probably eventually have him on the program and be his superior in that sense. Yeah, and like just zero acknowledgement. So I encountered a lot of that. Yeah, but I guess it was after that HR incident and after reading a lot more and then writing my thesis that I understand. Yeah, the starting point of outdoor ed, like the like you said, the European American centric worldview of the outdoors and the definition of wilderness, and so this is all really new to me, and this is like me after working as an outdoor professional for 12, 13 years and reading all this and realizing, whoa, okay, that's a lot I did not know, and this explains a lot of what I'm experiencing.
Yeah, and so why don't we kind of talk about that romanticized view of wilderness and nature where people aren't part of it, they just visit it, versus, in other cultures and a lot of other places throughout the world have a very different view of how they interact with nature. Why don't we talk about that? And I think after that we can start kind of maybe going through the presentation a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess the phrase wilderness was underpinned by writers like John Muir and let me look at my notes again. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, like this idea of like the wilderness as untouched, as a space to protect, and that came in a time when these writers completely exclude the idea that these spaces were already places of living and working and recreation for indigenous peoples. So that's like that separation, the idea of that separation was promoted by these writers. And I think the start of outdoor ed, start of scouting, start of Outward Bound, also came from it's like the descendant of this idea where we're there to conquer nature. It's a very, very masculine idea. And, the conquering is like really disregarding like the already active and very lively entity of the outdoors, like the outdoors is alive. Yeah.
Humans can be symbiotic with it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so like this heritage of male heroism, nature is to be survived and conquered. And that definitely translated to here to Australia because, Australia is still grappling with the post-colonization ideas. They're trying to unshackle a lot of thinking here, which is coming because the start of colonization in Australia is assuming that the land was empty, terra nullius. They disregarded the indigenous peoples. The English came and claimed the land, thinking no one's claimed this, so this is ours. So that was the heritage of the thinking, and that has fed into in the 20th century outdoor education, and that's just slowed down. I know that where I grew up, with a Chinese heritage, and when I tell my family and relatives that I'm working outside, they don't understand why I'm doing that, because for them outside is labor. My aunts and my grandparents' generation, they've they live their lives working outside, and so they don't see the outside as recreation. And then I came across a bit of research as well that in terms of the Chinese conception of what nature is, it's quite interesting. So they see beauty in a manicured garden. So that explains a lot of the landscape gardens in a lot of Chinese temples and palaces of ancient China. And then they see untamed nature as wild and dangerous and fearsome. So that's like ancient Chinese thinking, and that's translated down to culturally to me.
Yeah.
So now, like, I tell family that I work outdoors. So why would you do that? You know? Yeah.
Yeah. So they might see, being out in untamed nature is something that is maybe not something they want to do because it's dangerous.
Yes, correct. Yeah, there's a risk, there's a fear and a risk involved, like associated with this untamed nature. That's right.
Yeah, risk involved for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we saw some of this with your book chapter, Beyond Tropes, a dialogue on Asian women's experiences in the outdoors with Jade Ho. And Jade Ho and you had this great conversation that was really illuminating. It allowed the readers to really gain a lot of empathy for some of your experiences and whatnot. But when you had that conversation with Jade Ho and then you put it into this book chapter, what were some of the major themes that came out of your conversation with Jade?
Major themes was, it's interesting to have a chat with, so I never knew Jade at all. We were connected to write this article because a lecturer in Australia, she was working at a conference that I submitted a proposal for, and that conference never went ahead because of COVID. And this lecturer is called Mandy Baker. She's a researcher in outdoors in camps, and she's from Canada. And she'd say to me, "Oh, how about you write a chapter thing with Jade here that I know of from Canada?" So I never met Jade before, and we had a few Zoom meetings just to like get to know each other. And then when we talk about our stories, we come from such different backgrounds. She's Taiwanese, moved to Belize when she was young, so she had a lot of her childhood in Belize. So that's quite unique in itself.
Yeah.
And now she's in Canada doing a PhD and live her adult life there, and researching outdoor spaces as well. And so like our stories are very different. But then we had a lot of shared themes in our experiences in the outdoors, in how people view our capability and our skill in the outdoors, and they undermine our existing knowledge, or they assume that we don't have we're not wearing the right shoes, we don't know how to operate in the outdoors. And also, Jade grew up in the forest of Belize. She goes around walking barefoot in the hills a lot, and then she goes to Canada, and people look at her shoes as like, "Oh, you sure you want to wear that? That's not quite suitable for the outdoors." And then that just completely disregards her prior experience of like going outside to walk on a trail does not mean you need $100 shoe from REI, to make you capable. Yeah. So,
right.
So we had a lot of shared experiences like that. And the other shared theme was that, we are both attracted to the outdoors because it feels like a place that we can be ourselves, like our true selves. And we both have like shared struggles with a lot of cultural connotations of what being an Asian woman is, and I find my freedom in the outdoors, and so did she. So the expectation of being an Asian woman, you have to be slim and slender and pretty, and so the very patriarchal idea, and
very patriarchal.
And I think back to myself as a kid, and it's like, yep, that's why I'm also always outside, because I strive against those expectations, and being outside is where I can naturally be ourselves. So those are very, 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 very interesting shared themes. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I liked at the start of the article that I did the Google searches at the start of the article.
yeah,
And so I think like one of the Google searches was type in outdoors Asian woman or
yep,
something like that. And you just scroll down through for a while and it's more of models being outside versus, someone that's actually a practitioner going bushwalking or
yeah,
camping.
yeah.
It was
So
totally true.
it's still happening now, right? Because I think I last checked 6 months ago, and so the algorithm has not changed, has it?
Yeah, well, I checked yesterday. So
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
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 well, it's interesting that the outdoors is this great place for getting some extra freedoms and some escape and whatnot, but it's certainly not a neutral space. I mean, this is a place where you have experienced a variety of barriers, and especially the intersectionality of some barriers too, that just have this compounding effect that can make things really challenging. And so, I wanted to transition into your thoughts about the outdoors not being a neutral space.
yeah. I guess the outdoors is not a neutral space when there's other people around you, I think. And that's not a fair statement, I guess. I need to acknowledge that like the outdoors is not neutral and it's not terra nullius. People have walked and toiled and walked this land, and there's stories and history behind it, and we need to acknowledge that, and I need to acknowledge that, and I need to remind myself that often. And I guess in the context of this statement, the outdoors is not a neutral space. I think for us, the outdoors is not a neutral space because we're interacting in the outdoors with other people around us, and because we're surrounded by other people, they come with their preconceptions and their ideas
Right.
of who they think I am based on how I look or how I present myself. And it relates to coworkers, it relates to the students that I lead, it relates to the people that I meet on trail, and also it relates to like what cultural connotations that people have on that space itself, for example. And I say that in the sense that, for example, there's a place in Australia called the Murray River. It is one of the main river systems that goes across the whole continent. And it's a very popular recreation space. People go boating there, paddling, motorboating. It's a massive long river with a lot of public land surrounding it, so a lot of people camp around it. But also means that there's a lot of people squatting and living on the river. And I would say that space is not a space that I want to go on my own for recreation. I will go there for work because I'm surrounded by a team behind me, but I will not be comfortable going there on my own because there is, I just don't know who I will encounter, like living
Right.
in a camper van in the middle of nowhere. And most of the times that I've been there for work, they're all just very white, conservative Australian, and usually men that's like the normal community up there, and I don't feel safe. And
Yeah.
and bringing into recent history that there's also like a growing far right movement in Australia, and same with America, I suppose. And so that Murray River region is a place where you meet a lot of people like that, and
Yeah.
I cannot say for sure that they are far right or they are the pro white Australians, but still like they're there, and so that's not a neutral space for me to go in on my own and want to navigate. Yeah.
Right. I think that's a great way to put it in that, it's not a neutral space, and, people are bringing their social constructions and conceptualizations to no matter where they're at, even in wilderness nature settings. And there was a line that I was looking for here that I wrote down. I wish I could find it about people's construction of these places. But there was a great line that you had in your paper that I really liked. Was it I don't know. I'm not seeing it, but I had it written down. But it was something to do with the neutral space. But I wanted to get into a quick digression real quick because we were talking about these different areas out in Australia. Have you been bushwalking out in the Kimberley Mountains? Is that a place?
Yes. Well, that's in Australia. But actually, that's very far remote. It's in the northwest corner.
Okay.
Yeah, I have been there because I was a volunteer for ultra marathon that went through the area.
Oh, really?
That's the only time I've been there. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That was an adventure story on itself because there was a bushfire that came through the race and people got burnt, and I was part of the rescue, so it was quite dramatic.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a well-known fire incident within Australia. Yeah.
What year was that?
That was 2011, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember.
Yeah.
I had a buddy that I studied with in my PhD that was from, I think he's from Hobart, Tasmania. So down in the southern part of the island.
That's far south. That's complete opposite to the Kimberleys. Yep.
Yeah, it is. It's almost like, opposite quarter of Australia pretty much, right?
Yeah.
And he actually does open ocean sea kayaking, which is pretty cool. But he is always like, Brian, if you come down to Australia, I got to take you backpacking in the Kimberley Mountains because there's a lot of just indigenous artifacts, I think petroglyphs that are really beautiful. And so I've heard a lot of great things about the Kimberley, and so I got to get down there and check that out. It relates really well to like this whole outdoors is not a neutral place, because places like the Kimberleys and Central Australia, the Red Centre, I've been to Alice Springs once, and I've been to Kimberleys once, and you enter these spaces and you feel the energy, like you feel the historical and the spiritual energy of the people of the land, and you sense it, and you sense the enormity of the spirit behind these places. So that it's not neutral, it's not terra nullius, it's not empty space to be conquered. Yeah. No, I think that's wonderful. And I think that, talking about outdoor wilderness nature is not a neutral space. And after you kind of explained that in your presentation, you got into a line that I thought was really, really wonderful. And that was, to combat the exclusionary nature of the outdoor industry is to dismantle the construction of wilderness as a neutral space by pointing out who has been rendered out of place. And I think that ended up transitioning you into your thesis research.
Yes. Yep. And my research is about lived experiences of people of color, POC, that works in outdoor in Australia, and there wasn't that many people to approach, and I almost feel like I know almost everyone that are POC that works in outdoor because you don't encounter them very often, and then you meet them and you're like, oh wow, okay, I remember your name. But I still found about 15 potential participants, and eventually 8 people came through and gave me some good data and some good input.
Nice.
And the process of looking for people of color who work in outdoor, I discovered that the peak bodies and the universities and the training schools that offer all these training programs and the organization themselves, they don't collect demographic data. And so they don't have offhand like the percentages of people who were not born in Australia or does not identify as white Australian. They don't have that data. Yeah.
Wow. That's surprising.
And I cast my net far and wide and asking lecturers and professors, like, do you know anyone? And, usually people just have like 1 or 2 names. And I definitely have asked people that question. And they'll be like, oh, interesting question. I've never really thought about that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So like, it's just, this idea is so new to them to think about that. Yeah.
So you had you said 8 participants?
Yep.
Yeah. And go for it.
Oh, just saying, like, out of 8, one was born in Australia and everyone else was born overseas. And 7 out of 8 spoke another language besides English. And the breadth of experience is quite wide as well. Only 2 people had less than 5 years. 5 people have worked in the industry between 5 to 10 years. So, a good amount of time when you consider outdoor ed that has a very short career lifespan. And then I had a participant who's been around for more than 10 years. So, they definitely come from a very rich and full of depth experience to share.
Yeah. And for conducting your research, was it a narrative approach?
Yeah, I did. So I started out with some survey questions, open-ended questions, just to have them share some stories. And then I picked 3 people to have an in-depth interview. So we spoke for about an hour, and from there, just to interrogate further. All right, you mentioned this thing. Can we delve deeper in that? And from there, I collected all the stories and come up with themes, and had a few themes that's shared across the board for all of us POCs that work in outdoor ed.
Yeah, and so why don't we get into some of those themes that did emerge from your research? And I think one of those was, kind of how people define the outdoors and recreation and leisure. And so why don't we talk about that, how maybe there's some heterogeneity across cultures there with that finding, with that emerging theme.
Yeah, well, one thing that was consensus across the board is that none of our families understand what we're doing. They don't understand what outdoor recreation is. They don't understand what being a professional in the outdoors means. And because of language, there's some for some people there's a language barrier in explaining the work because we don't have the words to describe the word. And also most of us come from cultures where, and we discussed this before, they don't see the outdoors as a place of recreation. They see it as a place of labor. Yeah. Some cultures see it as a place of oppression. And as I quoted from one of my participants, there's no concept of outdoor adventures when they grow up in a very urban city. They're just trying to make a living. People who live in the outdoor environment, they are struggling. They're not quite there, and they don't have the luxury. Adventure is a luxury, and if you're living outdoors, that kind of life is adventurous enough for them. So, and they don't see going to the countryside as a recreational experience because they already spend so much resources trying to move into the city to try and make a living. So that's a very industrialized kind of history of that culture and that country. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So it was almost like we worked so hard to get out of these rural spaces into urban spaces. Why would we want to go back just to recreate there?
Yeah. And that parallels with my dad's experience. He grew up in a small country town, and he moved to the big capital city of Kuala Lumpur as a young man, and made it into the middle class. And why would you want to live back out in a little village in the regional area?
Right.
And for a lot of the participants, because their families do not come with this idea of outdoors as recreation, a lot of us learn about or got exposed to outdoor recreation as an idea through groups like scouts or school camps, so organized events. Some might be lucky enough to have friends that introduce them, but for most of us, our families were not the starting point. And that really is a huge contrast to specifically in Australia, where right now it's summer holidays, and you go out there to any destination, it'll be full of families, spending time in the beaches and camping and recreating, and it's such a common thing. It's just part of being Australian. But if you for us non-Australians, at the start, we don't have that prior knowledge growing up. And yeah, so you need to, and from learning outdoor rec in all these organized groups, you need to know the right people and learn the right pathway to get into the profession, because it's not something that's known. Like you don't go to a job fair when you're in high school and get told like, hey, this is an opportunity for you to do this. I definitely didn't have that. There's something that happening now in Australia, but definitely not in Malaysia.
Yeah, so it's almost like research participants didn't even get introduced to outdoor recreation in terms of the Australian conceptualization of it till quite later. And then it's like, how do you even get into this? Like, how do I find someone to help me progress as a career or to even get started? Like, those are some tough hurdles. Yeah,
correct. And I think back to my starting point. How did I even find out about Australia offering the Cert 4? And that was because I was working in an outdoor company that had people coming from outbound Malaysia, and in their work in outbound Malaysia, they met other people from other countries, and then they know about Australia offers this. How about you check it out? I just remember this one tip offered by a friend, and then I just then I found it. I was like, oh, okay, this. If they didn't tell me, I wouldn't have. Probably will take me a long time to figure out. Like, oh, okay, this opportunity exists. Yeah.
But then I also got to imagine, going back to what we kind of talked about earlier, is in the outdoor education industry, the decision makers, the people that are holding these senior positions, typically are white men, right? And so it might be hard to get noticed, despite that you might have more experience, because they will think, oh, there's this white guy here who, he comes from maybe an affluent background. He's done these glamorous trips. So therefore he's going to be a more effective outdoor educator. And I think that's something that would be challenging too, especially if you don't have those people that are in senior positions that to help you progress through.
Yeah, correct. Yes. A lot of my peers, they come from universities here, or they have had family members who've done outdoor ed in their early years, so they know people who know people, and that helps them through the career progression. And one of the things from my thesis, I talked about, like I titled it, is it a glass ceiling, a bamboo ceiling, or just plain concrete ceiling?
Yeah.
Because because especially the participant who's had more than 10 years of experience, his background is from India, and he's done like Himalayan trips, and he's done training in that kind of region. And he's worked for most of the major outdoor providers in Australia by the time he got here. And yet he gets overlooked for leadership positions or progressions that he's after. And partly probably because he doesn't speak English as the way that most Australians speak here. He still speaks with an Indian accent, and he probably gets looked down upon a little by that. He spoke to me about this job opportunity where he had to go through extra hurdles to prove his capability, and still never got the job. And then another white man come in and has half the experience that he has, but he's just somehow got it without having to go through those hurdles to prove his capability. And that man has the network from that school to say, oh, okay, I know someone in the school and I got the job. So that's happened very often. Yeah.
And that's another example of some institutionalized racism too. And I was thinking of something kind of a similar type of situation, and one that I've come across in reading research is that with people that aren't cisgendered, heteronormative, and are working in outdoor education world, and might be super experienced, 10 plus years, they have all the competencies, because they're homosexual or maybe they're trans, they get overlooked because of their sexual or gender identity, and it seems like it's kind of like a similar type of discrimination, but different, but a parallel one. And that's something
exactly.
that I know. Yeah. It's
and
something
like
go for it.
I feel like, through all the job rejections I've had, because of these intersection identities, it's really hard to really isolate, like, what is the reason here? Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm Asian and POC? Is it because queer? Because I'm queer? But like the queer identity isn't that salient for me here, because there's actually a lot of queer women working in outdoor in Australia. But then I still don't know whether I didn't get the job because I'm not white or because I'm a woman. Am I experiencing sexism from this person in the panel? And am I experiencing racism from this other person from this panel? You cannot isolate things like that.
There's no way.
It's a compounding factor. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Major compounding effect. And I bet when you get rejected from a job that you had an interview for, you probably get some sort of just ambiguous statement like, hey, we didn't think you were ready for this position, or we didn't think you had the competencies, but they never get into it. So you never know, which I got to imagine just makes, like, it'll make my mind just go on a negative loop.
Yeah, the classic one I've always, I've gotten once is like, oh, we don't think it's the right time for you to do this. But it's the right time for someone with 5 years less field experience to do it. And
That's crazy.
And the only reason that I could see that happening is because it's a community-based role in the regional in regional Australia, and they see that my skin color as a challenge in doing that role well. Mm-hmm. That's my conjecture of that, But I can only guess. They're not going to say that outright.
Right. And it probably does lead to a lot of mental conjectures. But what an interesting response. I mean, why there's no reason you wouldn't have applied. Like, you applied to it because you're ready for it right here and there. And so to be told that there was something else going on that you'll never find out. And I think that's a really hard thing to deal with.
Yes. Yeah. And eventually I was in this organization for 3 years, and I don't know, I think I applied for 10 to 15 roles, parallel, lower role, higher role, and I never got anywhere. And in one of the conference presentation, I wrote a spoken word poem, and I said that you won our labor in the field, but that's it. That's where you want us to isolate. Like, you want to keep us in the field because you need us out there and we have the competencies to do it. But then once we want to do other things and progress, we were not allowed to. Yeah.
That's really, really challenging and horrible. And so, kind of coming towards the end of your presentation here, one of the things I wanted to focus on too was just looking at some of the maybe implications of diversity, equity, inclusion. What are some things that aren't costly, aren't resource intensive, that could be done in outdoor education to break down some of these barriers? So I'll give you an example. So here in the United States at national parks, we are critiqued that if you go to a website, sometimes it only shows maybe pictures of nature, or only shows white men going backpacking. And so people are like, okay, I'm getting signaled that I don't belong there. And so that to break down that barrier, something that is not costly nor resource intensive would be maybe to show a diversity of people enjoying that national park in different spaces, doing different outdoor recreation pursuits. And so with your research, what were some of the low cost, not super resource intensive diversity, equity, inclusion implications that came out of it?
I don't think I went through too deep with suggestions of that work, because for me, I was like, well, I'm not getting paid to do that. If you want like really detailed recommendations, pay me and I'll do it. But I guess like, well, what you gave an example was, it's one of the low hanging fruits that can be achieved here. the media representation in Australia for outdoor recreation is definitely not diverse. I think in 2019, I started my presentation in the conference by taking photos of every banner in the conference. And then I went through all the website of all the major outdoor providers and peak bodies and screenshotted every picture that has a person in it. And there was maybe 1 out of 30 screen captures that I got that had a person of color in it. So that's not happening. And so they're not putting people of color as the front of outdoor recreation or outdoor education. And one other recommendation that, it's not cheap, but it's something to look into is that there are actually a lot of people of color who are coming out for camping and recreating outdoors and going to national parks. I've definitely seen a change in the makeup of people that I meet in campgrounds on my own time. So people are going out and doing these things, but they're not choosing to sign on to be a professional. They're not signing on to train to do the Cert 4 programs. They're not seeing it as a viable career. And I feel like that's twofold because number one, they're not seeing that many people of color working this job, and number two, industry is not promoting it as a viable career. It's
Right.
yeah, it's a little bit right now. This is an industry problem where there's the vocational qualification and there's the tertiary qualification. They don't seem to talk to each other. It's a little bit ambiguous in what the levels are. It's not as clear cut as say teaching. Like teaching in Australia has very clear levels. Like to be this level, you need to do this, and this qualification to be this level, you need to be this and doing this. Whereas it's not very clear here, and so people of color are not seeing this as a viable or stable career. It's not a professional in their eyes, right? So that was a big thing. And I guess a low cost thing for them to do now is just to start tabulating demographic data of the people that come through their doors.
Right.
That can start. Like they need data to start with. The universities can just start collecting data with the current student cohort. Go back to their database and have a look at that.
Yep.
Organizations can start collecting demographic data and just have a look and have a big picture meta-analysis on their statistics and have a look and see okay, where's the imbalance here? I did that at the conference. I did a really quick demographic data with them. I said there's 260 or 80 attendees in this conference, and I counted 12 people who will probably be considered people of color, and that's about 4%.
Jeez, that's very low.
Yeah, that's very low. And Australia right now is having this revival of celebrating diversity and multiculturalism within politics, because last year we had an election that had the most diverse parliamentarians being elected into parliament, and there was a big celebration about that and a big chat about that. And yet, outdoor ed is at 4%. We are performing worse than Parliament, which is a very low bar to meet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when I explained that to them, they're like, "Whoa, I never compared that before." And I put out the census data, and we had a census in Australia 2021, and it says that more than half, so more than 50% of Australians now are first generation or second generation migrants.
Okay.
There's a long way to catch up, 50% with 4% representation in the industry.
Right.
So just a bit of progress will make a huge difference.
Yeah, and I think
to catch up to that.
Yeah, and that's a wild statistic. More than half of the Australian population are first generation or second generation migrants. That's a big statistic, and it's not reflected in the outdoor education industry. And I think that another thing too that we mentioned was getting people that are been historically underrepresented in outdoor education into those decision-making roles, and bringing those diversity of perspectives too, which I think would having people in those decision-making roles with diverse perspectives would just make the education program even better anyways. Like, it's a win-win.
Yeah. And like, if you can't find qualified people of color to become outdoor instructors, well, there's plenty of qualified people of color who will make good HR managers, who will make good administrators. Like they're out there. There's a lot of support team around outdoor field instructors. So why can't you have people of color working in those roles? And that will bring in the color and the perspectives that will influence how we write policy and how we hire people and how we do things, So it doesn't have to be just outdoor education instructors, because it takes time to train, but it doesn't take that long to. And I always argue this, like, hard skills, that's what I consider technical skills, that's easy to learn. But it's the soft skills, the social emotional skills, the teaching skills, the facilitation skills, that's the harder to learn. And people of color already come in knowing how to navigate different spaces and knowing how to communicate, like in a very, being the middleway, being the mediator. We're very good at that. Yeah. And it didn't take long for us to learn a hard skill to just run, say, a high ropes course or run a bike trip. You don't have to be an all-rounded hiker, biker, rock climber, skier to be the outdoor instructor. It can just be one thing, get them into the door and start doing it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point, PT. And, like me being a white male, like I just haven't had to navigate those social conceptualizations and interactions at all compared to, people of color and whatnot. And that fosters, having the ability to form leadership skills and those soft skills for social interactions and having empathy and compassion towards other people and approaching, all situations with kindness. That's all really great stuff and soft skills that, whether they wanted to or not, a lot of people in color, if they're in minority situations, do have to navigate those really challenging social situations, and they do develop skills that are totally overlooked.
Yes, we already come prepared with it, so put us in, get us out there and start harnessing those skills and start using them. Yeah,
that's a really fantastic point. I think you made a fantastic point too, that these outdoor education companies aren't just only about. Yes, it's about the education, but it's a company. So it's got the HR, it's got, maybe an IT person. It's got all these different things that are going on as a business too. And yes, you can hire people of color to those positions as well. Yeah. So those are two great notes. So, hey, I think like those two great notes were fantastic to end on your research. I wanted to hear a little bit more about you and your recreational pursuits. And when we started first interacting on email, it was right at around January 1st, and you were like, "Hey, Brian, I'm going for a hike. See, like, I'll get back to your email in like a week or so." I don't know if it's for a hike. What were you up to?
Well, I was on a 3-week trip around Tasmania.
Really?
Which I considered my adventurous spiritual home.
Cool. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. I think you've probably encountered a lot of people who live here that consider that. We were on a 3-week holiday or vacation in American words, where we went on a few mountain bike trips and mostly camping. And when I left and I wrote you the email, I went on a hike, 4-day hike into this area called the Walls of Jerusalem National Park. So it's in the central plateau of Tasmania, and the landscape there is like so unique and so special, and this area has this jagged cliffs with rock cliffs and walls, and this like kilometer long rock face, and it just jags out of like a certain flat plane, so I guess like the name is Walls of Jerusalem sounds really grandiose, and then you get there, it's like, oh, okay, I can see why they name it that. So it was just on a 4-day hike.
Yeah. And what's the name of that 1 kilometer wall? Is it like?
The different parts of it are named differently. So like there's one rock face that we climb called Solomon's Throne. So
Yeah.
yeah, and then we walked up a summit of another mountain. That one's called Mount Jerusalem.
Yep.
And then there's so up there, there's a lot of little, they call it tarns, Tarn, little alpine lakes.
Yeah.
And there's one called the Pool of Bethesda, I think. I've never read the Bible, so I don't know what they're referencing, but they all sound very biblical.
Yeah, it does sound very biblical.
Yeah.
I don't know the Bible super well myself. So.
Yeah. So it's very Eden-like, I suppose. Yeah,
it sounds like it. So
Yeah.
for me, I personally love backpacking and trail running as my two favorite outdoor recreation. And I guess you can say backpacking kind of goes along with hiking too. And I'm a pretty avid trail runner. I try to do that before work most days of the week, if it's warm enough. And then hopefully next week, I'm looking to get a permit for backpacking in Yosemite. You get it 6 months out.
Oh.
And I'm looking to get it for August 5th. So I need to apply on February 5th. But so backpacking
Nice.
and trail running are my favorite. What about yours?
I think the ones that I can really do very easily from home is these days mountain biking.
Oh, nice.
I enjoy mountain biking. And rock climbing is something that I really love, but I haven't done enough. And going to an outdoor crag can be quite challenging because they're all really far away from Melbourne. Yeah, and like I said, I only just had a rack in 2016, so I never really built up. Well, the good thing is now I live in the city, I can go to a gym and do bouldering and top roping quite often. So I'm building my strength and skills there. But I do really enjoy outdoor rock climbing. I just don't have a regular partner, and and I don't and so it's hard to it's hard to get out there on my own. But me and my partner we enjoy just bushwalking. It's enjoyable. And because she's very interested in orchids, so when we now go bushwalking, actually, she's pulling my attention to all the small details, which I always just walk past and be oblivious to. So it's nice. It's a slower pace, but
Right.
So do enjoy bushwalking. I guess I really enjoyed the last 2 years with my current role because it's a very well balanced work-life balance role. Because when I was working in the field a lot, sometimes when you're off the field, you're like, okay, I'm too tired to just go play on my own. I don't want to go outdoors again. But now, because I have a really good balance, I feel very motivated to go do long weekends and do little adventures. So, it's nice. Yeah. So mountain biking and rock climbing is my interest. And unfortunately, I developed a taste for cross-country skiing 2-3 years ago, and snow sports is such an expensive sport. So
it is. I struggle with affording that one. I used to live in Utah, Salt Lake City, and going skiing. I lived there for 3 years, and I think I only did it about a dozen times just because it was really hard to afford. But when I lived in Salt Lake, I actually got into some rock climbing. I was doing a lot of indoor rock climbing, and so I started with bouldering. Then I went to top roping, and then I found a partner for climbing.
Nice.
And he got me into lead climbing, and so I had to pass this competency test where they make you take a fall, and your partner's got to catch you and everything. And the lead climbing was quite an adrenaline rush. It was something that took a lot of skills and also just a lot of mental. I had to build up my mental tenacity.
It does. Yes. And because in Australia there isn't a lot of bolted routes, so sport climbing isn't as big as Victoria. Especially in Victoria, is mostly just tread climbing. So you place protection. So that's another big step. And so that therefore I said to afford a rack of all the friends and camps and things it's quite costly. But I enjoyed that because it slows you down. You're not trying to gun up this climb. slows you down, and like there's the mental puzzle of trying to place protection and thinking about it, and like being there's more strategy and mental game to it. So I like the slow mental game of tread climbing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like with that type of climbing, because of there's so much mental analytics into this like very small space, it's really mentally analytic. I mean, you're looking at every small little groove and everything. I find myself, I actually get into a flow state pretty quick. And I think it's because I'm just like analyzing all these like micro little lumps and whatnot where I can put something or put a foot, get a finger on. And so I find myself getting into a flow state. And before I know it, it's like 2 hours have passed and I've been climbing.
That's
right. Like, whoa, that was awesome.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. And I enjoy mountain biking a lot because of the flow state. Yeah, because you have to really focus on the trail and knowing what's coming up and like being like really watching where you're going. And it's like go out there, ride for an hour or two, be in flow state, and at the end you're like, oh, okay, that's enough. That's good. That's good for a day, you know?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because previously I was into long distance bike touring, and it's like I can't afford 8 hours of riding every day. So mountain biking is like a nice short burst, like of you out wandering the bush, and then you're in flow state, and then at the end of it you're like, okay, I've done like a good, satisfying amount of activity at the end.
And I guess kind of similar to rock climbing, you know, with mountain biking, you're paying attention to every little thing that every little rock that you got to either go up and over or around. And so there's a lot of mental analytics going as you're going at a pretty quick speed too. So that does get into a flow state. Yeah. It's good. Well, PT, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate you coming on to All Bodies Outside and sharing about your research. It was also wonderful to hear about your recreation and what you're up to. And I just wanted to say thank you. You know, I sent out this cold email to you, and you're down in Melbourne, Australia. I'm in Kansas, and we connected and we're able to talk about outdoor recreation. We're able to talk about making outdoor recreation a more accessible place for people to work in. And so this was just a wonderful conversation. So I want to say thank you for coming on to Old Bodies Outside.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And it's nice to, just grapple with the ideas and share my thoughts and experience. And hopefully, you know, it's another little stone in the river that I'm throwing in here, like trying to affect some change. I think America and Australia has very different kind of battles in terms of diversity and inclusion, but hopefully, you know, some things get moved forward a little bit with the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great outlook. Is, you know, just, you know, it's an incremental process. It's not, you know, huge sweeping change doesn't happen overnight. Sweeping change is comprised of incremental steps, small little ripples, one at a time. So I think your research definitely helped with that. So thanks for your research that you did. It was awesome. I loved learning about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to call it an episode. I'm going to throw on that outro music.
Yeah.